If you guys watched my previous video, how I escaped China, I told the story of how I in fact escaped China fairly unscathed, even though I had certain government forces looking for me. If you haven't watched that video, I recommend you check that one out first. Now, that video that you guys watched was filmed about 3 days after I had escaped mainland China, and I was kind of a refugee in Hong Kong. Nowadays, I would be nabbed within Hong Kong as well. But even back then, Hong Kong was not a super safe place to be if you're a dissident. Yes, there are many religious dissident groups in Hong Kong based out of Hong Kong, but at the time, there were still instances of people getting kidnapped back into mainland China to face trial in the Chinese court system that has a 99% conviction rate. China's no stranger to this thuggery, kind of dastardly government tactics to get people to make forced apologies and sentence them within their own borders, even if they commit crimes within Hong Kong, supposedly a free territory. So I was still pretty on edge, even being in Hong Kong, and I made sure never to stay in the same place for more than a couple days. Now, if you guys have been to Hong Kong, you'll know that it is one of the most expensive places to travel/live. So staying in a hotel there is insanely expensive, and I didn't have the money to, put myself up in nice hotels. So what I would do is find these tiny, disgusting hole in the walls, like, 50 floors up in some of these buildings in some of the more greasy downtown, kind of scummy districts of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is full of glitz and glamour, and it's quite a beautiful city. In fact, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, but it's not any different than some areas that you might find in Manhattan that are kind of greasy and shady as well. So I was frequently neighbors to illegal immigrants, prostitutes, low-level criminals, really, staying in these places that would often cost $50 a night, which in Hong Kong is incredibly cheap. Most of the time I wouldn't have a window. I would have to put up with loud noises from people fighting and throwing bottles and all kinds of crazy stuff. But it was very rough having to hop around to a lot of these different places and packing up my bags and going to hide out in a different place while I sorted this out. Now, while I was hiding in these places for about a month, I was contacting people that confirmed that yes, there were certain government forces looking for me. It didn't make me like the most wanted man in China, but what happened was somebody needed to answer for the fact that I was flying a drone, the fact that there was collaboration between these government branches to try to get me, whether they were going to deport me or try me for something, somebody needed to deal with me. And I am of the opinion today, based on the people that I actually talked to within the Chinese government, that I was kind of let go in a way, in that if I managed to avoid, confrontation or direct contact with these government branches, then I would be let out. And if I came back, then they would deal with me. I didn't have like an exit ban per se, but there were government branches that wanted to at least talk to me about what the hell was going on. That being said, when my wife told me to basically get the hell out and we'll try to deal with this as soon as possible, I was incredibly stressed out because my wife actually was in the middle of her green card application to come to the US. Now, we weren't planning on moving necessarily, but we wanted to, get her green card so that someday in the future we could decide if we wanted to move if things, got bad within China. There were vibes. There was writing on the wall. It was not a good place to be an American foreigner in particular, especially one that makes videos online and publish documentaries without a journalist license, more or less. Now, after I had that scare at the border where they knew me by my Chinese name, Ma, which is, actually just one piece of the 3 characters on my Chinese driver's license, I knew that potentially my wife and daughter might have an issue getting out as well. However, what she did was she ended up staying with some distant relatives. She would hop around with relatives that were not super close to her, and she left our apartment that we bought that was in her name. And in fact, the building manager called many times to tell her that the police were looking for me, not necessarily her. Were looking specifically for me. They had pinpointed where I was. Now, there was a lot of talk about like, oh, if the Chinese authorities were actually looking for you, you have to register where you live as a foreigner so that the Public Security Bureau can know every movement that you have and where you're located. The thing is, both me and many other foreigners have played the system a little bit differently to avoid any potential confrontation. I actually never registered my new apartment at the PSB. The PSB knew my previous apartment where I lived, and that's where they actually contacted me multiple times to check my passport and harass me about what I'm doing filming. But when I bought my new apartment, it was actually in my wife's name, and I never went to the PSB to register it. My registration was still at the university. So that's why the police were looking for me with a photograph around the foreign frequented bars and things like that, because they actually just couldn't find me where I was supposed to be registered. Now, because I told my wife about this, she knew to stay with some distant family members and kind of hop around herself, until eventually her documents and her green card finally arrived in the post. So she had to go get those verified at some sort of office. And we had already had an exit permit ready for my daughter. She was already an American citizen. So in China, if you're an American citizen, like a child born in China, you have to have like an exit permit that allows you to leave. In the meantime, we knew that the longer we waited after she got her green card and stuff, the more dangerous this could potentially be. Because if they do want to come after your family, which they often do, they'll either exit ban you or they can take custody of your child. It's scary, scary stuff. So my heart was pounding, and I was like basically in tears every day when I was video calling them from these like hovels, these disgusting graffitied, greasy hovels, talking to my family who missed me dearly. I missed them so much, and I was just so worried. I needed them to get out. So I actually had a couple friends. Winston, you know, Winston from Serpent ZA was a huge integral part, as was Prazi over on his channel. You can check him out. They were two of my best buddies. They helped me out in this situation. They helped calm down my wife and calm me down, and they also helped organize trips to get luggage and stuff to the border where they would be able to like hop over with all their stuff. They helped us move, more or less. And then came the day where my wife and my daughter were going to try to cross the border. Now they crossed a different border than I did, but it was still into Hong Kong. And when they went through, she was questioned, but it was just innocuous questions like, why are you leaving? When are you going to come back? Blah, blah, blah. And they got through. And I'll tell you what, we didn't decide to meet and have dinner or lunch or anything in Hong Kong. We literally just went straight to the airport. And that's where the first time I saw them in about a month. I just ran to my daughter, just spun her around in circles and kissed my wife, and I just couldn't believe how much I missed them. And we were pretty much ready to board the next flight that we could to New York City. We still had to go through exit immigration, which still made me nervous in Hong Kong. And my wife, they make sure when you have a child that you know your child's name, so it's not like a kidnapping or something. And she forgot my daughter's name, and the border guard was like, what's wrong with you? I was like, what's wrong with you? You don't even know our daughter's name. But she was obviously flustered and freaking out. But we got on that flight, and I usually hate the flight between Hong Kong and New York City. It's very long, and especially when you have a child, like a whiny little child. But let me tell you, I savored every minute after that takeoff. Like I didn't sleep at all. I was so excited that we had managed to get out, as was my wife, and obviously my daughter didn't understand the situation. But when we touched down and went to the dreaded customs area where you have to go through, and when you have to enter immigration through JFK airport, I've never been so happy to see my own country, I'll tell you that. And my wife felt the same way. And there were my parents to pick us up and bring us back to a semblance of freedom where we can decompress and kind of figure this out. Now, over time, we've been in contact with a lot of people, and it was confirmed that they were definitely looking for me. The way things work in China is if you don't confront something directly, then you probably don't have too much to worry about. But when things go too far, when you actually have the responsibility of dealing with something directly, then things happen. So in China, there's a huge gray area. That's why people get away with so much stuff there. But when they get mad enough and somebody gives someone an order, then stuff gets done. And that's why I was the target of that. So people are curious as to why this didn't happen to some other people that were doing similar things to me. It's because in my local area, there was a directive. There's shuffles in the party all the time where people jockey for position. And I was a very easy target because I was one of the few foreigners in this very small city, as opposed to one of thousands and thousands in a place like Shanghai. So I was not a drop in the bucket. I was the bucket in this area. And unfortunately, that meant I was the one to get plucked. There's no system of law. There's no rule of law in China. So when they decide they want to do something, they'll do it. And it's not something you can fight in court. Look at my friend, he's in political prison. He literally ran a tour company. He went to jail shortly after I left, and I would have been him. I would have been him. My family would probably never see me again, just as I probably will never see my friend, Michael, ever again for the rest of my life. So it goes to show you, when there's a target on your back in China as a foreigner, there's no recourse. You have to go. And you have to find a way to get out. And you have to pray that they're not going to exit ban you. And I got really, really lucky that things didn't progress to that level. But when we talk to people, that exit ban absolutely would have happened if I had continued to stay and there was more and more of a case built up against me. And the case being that they wanted to try me for espionage, more or less. Not tied to any government organization, but espionage in that, like, they found me annoying that I spoke the truth about China. The fact that I would get footage of people and, you know, travel around the country and show the good and the bad. You know, and I maintain to this day that I've convinced more people that China is a good country full of good people than making people think it's a bad place. But after this kind of absolute nonsense, when I get searched and interrogated by a SWAT team on my travels and all of my stuff checked and my footage checked and harassed and handcuffed and all this kind of stuff just for traveling around the country, then you know you're in a place that is not mature enough to be on the world stage. And it's not a place that you want to be a martyr for. However, I maintain to this day that the Chinese friends and family that I have, the people I so deeply care about, I want a better future for them too. I want a better China for them. I don't want the country that I loved to turn into an absolute shut-down totalitarian state where your thoughts and actions are controlled. But unfortunately, that's pretty much what's happening now. So to conclude, my family and I are very happy living in the US. We continued to travel until, you know, this whole thing happened where people can't really move around anymore. But life's good. Life's happy, and I'm happy that maybe I can make some change. And I hope people that question their freedom in their countries understand that immigrants like my wife and returnees like myself appreciate the freedom and systems of justice so much more than we did about 10 years ago when I left to go to China. Truly, if you live in a Western democracy, you have no idea how lucky you are. And I wish more and more people would understand that instead of being spoiled and not participating in these systems, because it's easier to be told what to do and what to think. That is not the future I want for my daughter, and is not the future I want for anyone in this world.